All right, so we're back to section 1.7. This is going to be our third and final video in this section. You want to go all the way down to the rational inequalities. And again, we have 3 steps for solving rational inequalities. Step number 1, and this is going to be the most important step, rewrite the inequality so that 2 things happen. First of all, 0 is on one side, and secondly, there is a single fraction on the other side. Now I'm going to do that for example 8 first, and then I'll walk you through what steps 2 and 3 are going to be. So you'll notice here when we look at this example, first of all, I don't have 0 on one side. So the first thing I want to do is I want to subtract 4 on both sides. And then the second thing I want to do, it said that I was to make a single fraction. That's code for you need a common denominator. Well, right now my common denominator is x minus 3. So I'm going to multiply that negative 4 by x minus 3 over x minus 3. Remember, the value of this fraction is 1. That's why it's legal. So now I have a common denominator, which means I only have to write the denominator one time. And the top, I'm just going to write what the numerators are as they're already written. Make sure you follow the order of operations here by distributing your negative 4. So let's clean that up. And then we'll combine like terms. And we'll get negative 4x plus 18 all over x minus 3 is greater than or equal to 0. So that takes care of step number 1. Let's go to step number 2. Step number 2 says determine the values that will cause either the numerator or the denominator to equal 0. These values will help us with our intervals on the number line. All right, so take a look. We want to find out what makes the top equal to 0. And we also want to find out what makes the bottom equal to 0. So we just solve these little mini equations. It's a lot like solving the factors in the last video. So on this first example, this first part, we'll subtract 18 and divide negative 4. And then we'll reduce our fraction to 9/2, which happens to be the same thing as 4.5. For the second one, that one's really easy. So that's going to solve to x equals 3. Now, it's these values that will help us get our numbers on the number line. And once we have our numbers on the number line, we can get our intervals just like we did in the last video. So I'm not going to show all of that, but here's my numbers on the number line with my intervals. And then instead of listing our factors, we'll list our numerator and our denominator. Now, I noticed that I've written something incorrectly, and this could really cause a problem here. This is actually negative 4x plus 18. So let's make sure you correct that on the notes there. So negative 4x plus 18. And then let's go fill in our pos-neg chart just like we did in the last video. So for this first interval, let's choose 0. Negative 4 times 0 plus 18 is going to give me a positive. And 0 minus 3 is going to give me a negative. Next, let's plug in a 3. So negative 4 times 3 is a negative 12. Negative 12 plus 18 is positive. 3 minus 3 is 0. Now, in this interval, this is from 3 to 4.5. I would just choose the number 4. So a negative 4 times 4 is negative 16, plus 18 is positive. 4 minus 3 is positive. For the next one, 9/2, you already know this is 4.5. And remember, we already took the time and we know that 4.5 is the solution to this. So I know that if I plug in a 9/2, I'm going to get 0 here. You can test me on that, but you will get 0. If I plug in a 4.5 to the second, to the denominator, that'll be 4.5 minus 3, so that'll be positive. And here from 4.5 to infinity, let's choose a 10. So you have negative 4 times 10, that's negative 40, plus 18, which is negative. On the next one, 10 minus 3 is positive. So now what we're going to do, this is going to be a little different. Let's go to step number 3. Use a test value, so we just did that, from each interval to determine which intervals form the solution set. So now what we're going to do, remember that in the last video we multiplied our factors? Well, we're not multiplying factors now, we're dividing our factors. So instead of multiplying our signs together, we're going to divide our signs. So a positive divided by a negative is negative. A positive divided by a 0. Remember, you're not allowed to have 0 on the bottom, so we're going to say this is undefined. Undefined. A positive divided by a positive is positive. 0 divided by positive, that is allowed, and it's equal to 0. And then last but not least, negative divided by positive is negative. Now, what I didn't write here, let me go ahead and uncover that, is my fraction is greater than or equal to 0. Greater than or equal to 0, we want anything that's positive or equal to 0. So we want anything in here, and we want this guy because it's equal to 0. So the corresponding parts of our equation then, or our number line, are going to be all of those values. So our interval will start at 3. We're not going to include the 3 because it doesn't equal 0 at 3. It's undefined at 3. And then we're going to go all the way to 9/2, but we are going to include the 9/2 because it's equal to 0 there. It's a little warning here. Be sure that you're careful with the endpoints. And we just kind of talked through why we're doing what we're doing. Let's do one more of those. This one should go a little bit more quickly. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to get the 6 on the left-hand side by subtraction. But then we also need to get a single fraction, so we need the common denominator. So we'll multiply that -6 by 2x minus 3 over 2x minus 3. And then all I need to do is rewrite this with that common denominator. All I did was rewrite just with a single denominator. And then let's combine our like terms on top. Just remember to follow the order of operations. You have to do the multiplying before you do any adding or subtracting. Combine your like terms. And then what we need to do is we need to figure out what makes the top equal to 0 and what makes the bottom equal to 0. Those are the two things that we need to find. So the top, go ahead and subtract 19, divide by -6. So this is going to be a value of 19.6, which is the same thing as a little bit more than 3. And then for the second one, that one's easy. We're going to add 3 and divide by 2. Same thing as a half. 1.5. Now let's go put those numbers, the 3 and 1/6 and the 1.5, only I used improper fractions, on our number line. And this also helps us to split it up into our intervals. We'll make a list of our numerators and denominators. And then we're going to say that we want our fraction, coming back to our original question, we want our fraction to be less than 0. All right, so let's go ahead and come up with our pos-neg chart. So for this first interval, let's choose 0. So you're going to have -6 times 0 plus 19. So that'll be positive. 2 times 0 minus 3 is going to be negative. For 3/2 or 1.5, we know that this guy is going to be 0 because that was the solution to that one. If you do -6 times 1.5 plus 19, you can do that in your calculator if you want to. You're going to get a positive number. Then next we want something between 1.5 and a little bit more than 3. So I would choose either a 2 or a 3. So -6 times 2 is going to be a -12 plus 19. So that's going to be positive. Again, if I'm choosing a 2, 2 times 2 is 4. 4 minus 3 is positive. 19/6 we already know is the solution to this guy, so it's going to be 0. And if you get a number that's a little bit more than 3 and plug it into this, 2 times a little more than 3 is going to be a little more than 6, and a little more than 6 minus 3 is still positive. Last but not least, I want something past 3 and 1/6, so let's choose a 4 or a 5 or a 10. Let's choose 10. So on this first one then, I'm sorry about that. Don't know what happens. On this first one, -6 times 10 is -60, plus 19 is going to be negative. 2 times 10 is 20, minus 3 is positive. So now let's divide each of our signs. Pos divided by negative is negative. Pos divided by 0, remember you can't have a 0 on bottom, so this is undefined. Pos divided by pos is pos. 0 divided by pos is going to be 0. And negative divided by positive is going to be negative. I'm being asked for whatever gives me negative, only less than 0. So I'm going to have all of this interval, and I'm going to have all of this interval. And that corresponds with this guy up here and this guy up here. So then my solution set will be from -infinity to 3/2 in union with 19/6 to infinity. Believe there's one more reflection question. I'll let you answer this one on your own according to what we've talked through. But when you're solving these rational inequalities, how do you know whether to use an open or a closed interval? How do you know whether to use a round parentheses or a square bracket? It's a good question. Think through that one.